This conference will now be recorded.
Sorry about that. This is a reminder that this is going to be a recorded session and we're going to share this recording in a few days with you. So once again, welcome to our webinar on legacy giving. Before we start, some housekeeping. Because we wanted this to be a discussion, all your microphones are live. So please feel free to join in and ask questions at any point because you've been specially selected and invited for that purpose. However, when you don't speak, please mute your microphone to minimize any background noise or any feedback. I am Kiki, a behavioral scientist with DonorVoice, with a master's on neuroscience and a PhD in cognitive psychology. In my day-to-day work, I apply those insights to all giving behavior. Claire, on the other hand, is an expert on legacy fundraising. Her PhD looked at why people choose to leave legacies to charity, and she's now a consultant in legacy and in-memory fundraising. Today, myself and Claire are going to explore what motivates people to make a planned gift and how best to identify and approach them. What we want to emphasize today, more than anything else probably, is that legacy giving can't happen from one day to the next. Just like any other form of giving, a supportive journey needs to be in place. You can't expect people to leave a legacy just because you include a flyer in one of your direct mail appeals or make a phone call. Sporadic asks just aren't enough. Instead, we need to adopt a more holistic approach and a more informed strategy that starts with lead generation, continues with cultivation, and conversion. From what I've seen so far, and please correct me, when looking for legacy prospects, most charities turn to people who already support them frequently, maybe with some major gifts, but definitely with enough previous interactions. And they also look to people of a certain age. These factors remain important, but they're not the only ones that we should consider. And here's a list of factors that we think are important for legacy giving: the supporter's connection to the cause, their commitment to the organization, whether they have family or not, and their intention to make a planned gift. So for effective lead generation, you need to measure these four things. Starting with their connection to the cause. A person's identity is one of the key reasons one person gives to a specific charity. And when discussing with legacy pledgers which charities they have chosen, we find a clear link with their life narratives. So look at what this person shared. I selected Help the Aged because my mother has been helped by a care home. I support cancer research because I know people who died of cancer. I support an animal charity because I have cats. And then you have this person as well, who is motivated by a sense of reciprocity. She wants to give back to the charity that helped her husband. So your most promising prospects are the ones with a connection to your cause, and it usually takes one question to discover it. It's just that this question is going to be different from charity to charity. Then you need to measure their commitment to your organization. Two supporters with the same connection to the cause will not have the same commitment to your charity. And commitment to an organization is developed gradually and is determined by two elements: a functional connection, whether the supporters get what they expect from the relationship with you, for example, an acknowledgement of their gift or listening to their preferences. And that leads to an increase in personal connection, which describes the more emotional part of the relationship. Both of these elements determine the supporter's commitment to the organization itself and their intention to stick around. And that's what affects their giving behavior. All this isn't just a fuzzy concept, it's very accurately measurable. After years of research, DonorVoice has identified these 9 proprietary questions to measure commitment. So you can measure supporter identity with one question. You can measure supporter commitment with these questions. Next, you need to capture whether your supporter has a family and whether they have kids or grandkids. And that's important because it really determines whether people will make a planned gift. Looking at this table, you can see a significant decrease in the percentage of charitable estate when we move from people with no kids to people with kids, from 50% down to 17%. And that reduces even further when we look at people that also have grandkids. Finally, but as importantly, you need to capture their intention to make a planned gift, ranging from I've already left one to you down to I will never leave a legacy gift to you. And this insight, along with the commitment, can really help you to target the most promising prospects. Now, let's see how this can happen. Here you can see some data from one of our client projects, and the rows include supporters, and they have ranked them based on their intention to leave a planned gift. But you can also see their commitment scores in the columns and their past giving behavior. Now, when you look at the last two rows, people who consider leaving a planned gift and people that will not leave a planned gift, and when you looked at their giving behavior, you can't really differentiate between the two groups. Whereas when you take into account their commitment levels, you can see that there is a large difference. So the commitment score will give you a better indication of their intention to leave a planned gift. In addition to that, commitment and intention can help you create a smarter hierarchy in order to prioritize who you contact first. So hopefully we've shown you the value of this insight. Now, how can you collect it? This is just a visual illustration of the questions you need to ask. The identity question is going to be different from charity to charity, but the other three remain the same. And these can be included in a DM appeal on the reply form as a standalone survey. It could be included in an email on your website. They could be asked during a telephone call. And you should be asking these questions to your existing supporters, but also to your new supporters that just joined in. And that's how you will create your legacy prospect pool. Right, so at this point, I'd like to get your thoughts about all this. What do you think of the approach? Are you using similar strategies? If not, what are the barriers? Does this make sense to everyone? Is there anything that you would like to change or to comment on?
I don't know
Hi
if
there.
I'd be.
Sorry.
Oops. I was just going to say, I don't know if I'd be comfortable asking directly about the kids, no kids in a questionnaire like that. It's good information to have, but I just don't know if I'd feel comfortable asking that question.
Can you please explain what is it that makes you uncomfortable to ask the question if someone has kids? Because by itself, it's not an offensive or sensitive question like maybe religion or political orientation.
Yeah, well, I guess I think, they might know what we're after there. I don't know. I don't know if other people feel the same way.
So that was exactly the point that I was just about to raise, is that if it was to be done in sort of such a sort of obvious way, like through a form where we might already be talking about legacy giving, I would worry that it would be very clear what our intentions are, and that, if you take no kids, oh, well, we're after you for, because we think you're a better prospect for us. I think if it was done through sort of relationship fundraising, so, community fundraisers that are already having those relationships, and that's something that could come out of just a natural conversation, that would feel very comfortable. But as a sort of colder tool or as part of a sort of feedback form or a tick box, yeah, I'd be uncomfortable about them knowing our intentions.
Yeah, that makes sense. But as I said, it's up to you how you ask these questions and where. You can include it at any point of their relationship with you, when they first join or during a phone call. You can make it more personal. In addition to that, you can be honest about it. We want to know who you are so we can talk to you in the right way and find offers that match your motives, your identity, and your preferences.
There's a particular There's particular sensitive in the UK around asking for information such as do you have children or not, because in the context of the GDPR regulations, the data regulations here, you have to basically give clarity on why you're asking. And if it's a propensity towards a legacy ask, it gets very awkward. And given there's quite a lot of political and editorial sensitivity in places like the Daily Mail, a story like charities targeting childless couples is going to be very disruptive for the individual charity in question and the sector in general.
Yeah, that makes sense. However, I said here that your most valuable prospects are people with no kids. Yep. However, that doesn't mean that you're not going to target people with kids. It's just that the message will be different. So knowing if someone has kids or not, and as we're going to discuss later on in this webinar, is going to determine who you prioritize and how you speak to them. So it's not going to be that you only target them. But I appreciate the concern, and maybe that's a good thing to know and discuss how to avoid this perception that we're going to only target specific people that are vulnerable, which might not be the case. These people, people with no kids, actually have a desire to leave something behind, and we can offer them the chance to do that by supporting a cause they believe in. It's just how we do it that needs to be carefully thought out.
Yeah, and there might be perhaps, oh sorry, I was going to say it might be a subtler way of asking a question as well around something like, how important is it to you to leave a gift to your family, or something along those lines, which might be asking quite a similar question without necessarily being as explicit.
So in our organization, we ask the question, but it's very clear from the cover letter and the first questions in the survey that it is about legacy and getting a sense of how people feel about legacies. And then at the end, we do say, these are questions for just statistical purposes and informational purposes. And so far, as I know, no one has ever had any negative reaction to it. And this is like a survey being used in many different markets around the world. So it's not just in Canada or in North America. And so this is just a way of, and also let's not forget that the people that we send the survey to are people who also have been supporting the organization for many, many years. So we have a very close relationship with them already. It's not like it's a cold call or anything like that. So, so they're very, very warm prospects. So, I mean, at the end of the day, if you don't test, you will never know, and it'll just be a personal feeling, sometimes we tend to make some decisions based on our perception of what it might be and you might get a different response if you actually test it with different groups of people.
Yeah, correct. That's great. And with that comment, I will hand on to Claire to continue and talk about cultivation and conversion.
Brilliant. Okie dokie. Right. Fab. So hopefully everyone can see my screen now. Moving on to cultivation. So Kiki's already talked to you a little about donor identity and how important that is. And I would just reiterate that really in the context of that link between someone's life experience and the choice of legacy charity. There's some fantastic fMRI research that Professor Russell James has carried out, which actually shows that particular areas of the brain are activated when someone is thinking about legacy giving, which essentially are the same bits of the brain which are activated when someone is looking at photos of themselves during their life course that stimulate really vivid autobiographical memories. So as well as the lovely quotes that Kiki has shown you, there's also research from a very different methodological perspective, which underlines very much the same thing. And linked to this issue around life experience, as you can see on the slide, many people feel this need to pay back a charity for support they might have given themselves or support they might have given to a family member. There's a study from Adrian Sargent back in 2005 where he looked at what essentially are the main differences between people who are planning to leave a legacy and the supporter base in general. And one of the big differences that he found was that people who are leaving a legacy were much more likely to be motivated by this sense of reciprocity. So, you know, as Kiki's already pointed to, really, as part of the cultivation process, we do need to be looking at understanding and emphasising supporters' connections to causes. Alongside that, though, is the importance of charity performance. So again, as you can see from a couple of the quotes here, this is people are particularly concerned about making sure that they leave their money to an organisation that essentially at its core is going to be efficient and effective with it. And again, as it says on the slide, it's very much because we think that people who are leaving a legacy really have to trust you that you're going to spend the money well. They're not going to be there to make sure that you are using it effectively. So it's crucial really that we reassure potential pledgers that their donations are going to be used well now, but also very importantly that they will continue to be used effectively in the future. And for me, we're going to talk in a moment about the importance of creating a sense of immortality for legacy supporters. And for me, this issue of efficiency and effectiveness really also links to that. Because actually, if you've got this sense that a charity is not going to use your money effectively, or it might fritter it away in some way, then actually that stops your influence carrying on, and actually potentially could damage someone's sense that they're going to achieve a form of immortality with their legacy giving. Okay. So I think this is a really, for me, really crucial slide when you're thinking about legacy giving and people's motives. The legacies, obviously, talk of legacies for many people is some form of reminder that one day they'll no longer be here. And so what the research tells us is that when you get these mortality reminders, your very first reaction is just to push it away. And I think for me, that's really both the joy and the pain of legacy or planned giving fundraising, is that we're always up against this initial barrier that people have of wanting to avoid reminders of their own mortality. So it makes it extremely interesting space to work in, but also a challenging space to work in at the same time. So what, again, the research tells us is that at various points in our lives, thoughts of our own mortality are able to break through that sort of initial layer of defence, that initial reaction to just sort of push things away. And what we do to defend ourselves at that point is essentially to create for ourselves a form of symbolic immortality. As it says on the slide, an egocentric motive to extend sense of self forward in time. And we can do that in quite different ways. So again, as the slide would indicate to you, that obviously having kids is one way that people will create for themselves a sense of immortality. You are passing on your genes, you're passing on your values, but there's other ways you can do it, from, you know, planting a tree, getting some sort of sense of communion with nature, to writing a poem that's going to echo down through the ages. But for me, actually, in our space, I think that actually leaving some money to charity is a really fantastic way to generate that sense of symbolic immortality. And wonderfully, it's actually something that's open to everyone. You know, we can't all necessarily write the epic poem or, you know, pen an opera that's going to live on for hundreds of years into the future. But actually, we can all leave our mark on the world, potentially, through leaving a legacy. And actually, there's also, it's worth pointing out, there's sort of two elements of symbolic immortality. So one of them is the sense that one is part of a community, in the sense that if you're part of a community, then important elements of your identity will carry on, whether that's literally people in your community that knew you will talk about you, or your values, your passions, your interests, whatever that might be. And the other important element of symbolic immortality is a sense actually that you are an important, valuable individual. And the two are interlinked in the sense that to be an important, valuable individual, you actually have to live up to the standards that are set by the community. And then finally, there's this sense of posterity, the idea that people want to make sure that they leave something positive, or they leave a positive memory behind them. And actually, in my own PhD research, I think pretty much this is what people's motivations boiled down to right at the end, was that they left things well, that they left the world behind them a better place in some way, shape or form. So posterity is particularly important, linking back to these issues around symbolic immortality, when you know that society has a high regard for people that leave a legacy. So actually, it matters to our donors who are potentially leaving a legacy that they are remembered in some way, that they achieve this sense of posterity, but also potentially to people that are going to be considering a legacy in the future. We need to show them that we honour people that have left gifts in whatever way, shape or form that might be. And again, some research from the States suggests that about a third of people have this desire to leave a positive, lasting memory. Although again, I have a hunch that it's probably even higher than that, that it's really important to people overall. And perhaps a few of us are actually happy to admit that in survey style research. Okay, so how do we bring all of this we've been talking about together? So as we looked at in the first of my slides, really, it's about recognising the supporters' connection to the cause and playing that back to them, emphasising that shared values, which also I think links to that idea of living on in some way, and potentially giving people the option to leave a legacy in memory or in honour of somebody that they love, which again can link back to that motivation around reciprocity and paying back. And also, again, as we'll look at a little later on, it's a very powerful motive or very powerful influence on legacy giving in its own right. We need to make sure that people can trust our organisations. So we need to, as it says here, show them how well legacy gifts are used, and that gifts will make an impact. As I was saying, linking to that issue about symbolic immortality, they, through their giving, will carry on making an impact on the world they leave behind. And potentially we could test this opportunity to fund a specific project, which links to the point above about having a personal, specific impact on the world we leave behind. We can pull even harder on these motives around immortality and posterity, show them how, again, their giving will enable them to live on in some way, shape or form, to be remembered well, and that actually this is a gift that will carry on having an impact in the longer term. And that ultimately, this will enable them to achieve symbolic immortality. And linked to that, again, emphasising that by leaving a legacy, they're an important person who is also a member of a community. And actually, when we discuss this point, it'd be interesting to hear, especially from the guys in North America, potentially, around, I think legacy societies are an interesting way to do this. So I'd love to hear if that's something that your organisations do. And of course, as I said, you know, we're fighting always this sort of big barrier of trying to just push away any thoughts of death. So we need to make sure that we avoid overt reminders of mortality. So, you know, saying things like "after you are gone," etc., etc. And we need to stay away wherever we can from death-orientated language. And again, Russell James refers to this idea that potentially you can wrap legacy in other topics. So, for example, we've mentioned surveys already, haven't we? And actually, a lot of organisations, again, have found success in including a legacy mention just as one question in a wider survey. Okay. So back over to you guys. It'd be great to know if you actually are using any of this research theory language in your current legacy plan giving marketing. And potentially, does this really sort of bring up any ideas for anybody of perhaps different ways of marketing legacies that you may not have considered beforehand? Can I ask then, specifically at that point around societies, legacy societies, is that something that anybody is actually using in the room?
Hello, this is Rich from Catholic Relief Services. So we do have a legacy circle, but that's really not the main reason in our case, I think, why individuals would leave a bequest. I think it's a nice recognition. It's a formal recognition opportunity at the time that they tell us that they've included CRS in their wills. But it's not really the main driver. I think the sense of community in our case really comes from being part of the Catholic faith and being part of the church, and the bequest gift being an act of faith. So I think the community comes from there rather than from the legacy society itself.
Yes, I guess in your case then it's much more potentially more of a stewardship vehicle than it is a sort of cultivation vehicle. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that's a really good example of the types of communities that people might be part of, and there's a very, very clear community there in your space.
Yes, I work for an animal shelter, and we have a heritage society, and we use it two ways actually. We use it as a way to bring people who've already told us about that they've included us in their will or trust, to bring them closer. We provide experiences at the shelter so they can really see behind the scenes how we do it. But we also use it as a way for people to raise their hand and tell us that they've included us in their will or trust by listing the benefits of our Heritage Society, which is an annual brunch or these experiences or more of a deeper newsletter that provides more of what our plans are for the future. So that's really helped us bring more people into our Heritage Society who may have included us in their plans but hadn't told us before.
Yeah, and do you know what I love? I'm glad you mentioned events as well, because I again think that events are a really great marketing tool for legacy, in the sense that it taps into actually a lot of what we've been talking about. So by actually sort of inviting someone along, as you say, to sort of come and sort of see behind the scenes, you're making them feel like a special person. If they're there with other people, then they're likely to feel part of a community. And I think you're really hitting the nail on the head when it comes to issues like trust. So they're really able to come and have a look at what you're doing, just to sort of look behind the scenes to know that there's nothing to hide, and to really see the impact of gifts. So yeah, I think they're a great tool, both for, I suppose, promotion and stewardship. Yeah, because it hits so many of the different legacy motivations.
Yeah, we found that it's pretty funny because we offered 5 for the first time last year, 5 different experiences. One was our dog behavior, one was our kitten season, one was education for children, one was just a feeding frenzy, going around and feeding the animals, and one was just general volunteering. And the same people kept showing up over and over. They
wonderful.
It really cemented their commitment to our work, and had them tell other people about the work that we're doing too.
Yeah, wow. That just sounds, and as well as all the sort of good things you said from a theoretical perspective, there's nothing wrong with getting to play with some puppies and kittens. That's you can't go wrong there, can you really?
Yeah.
Brilliant. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say, I'm sorry, I'm from the British Heart Foundation. Please stop me if anyone from Save the Children is here. But a few months ago, I went to a presentation by Save the Children, and they said that they, as part of their pledge of stewardship, initially tried sort of creating society. I think they called it the Jeb Society, based on their, I think their founder or something like that. And they found that essentially, in a nutshell, it flopped. People didn't like it. They didn't see the value in it. And then when we did our own insight on, what our pledges want, the big thing we found was that pledgers see themselves as a supporter of the charity, not a legacy supporter. So they want to feel more as part of like the charity community. So again, from that insight we've got in our stewardship journey, again, we're trying to get it back to our sort of local community. So for the pledges that we find that are sort of highly engaged, highly motivated, we try and get our local community fundraisers to be that point of contact and get them involved in their local area. And so they feel like they're part of sort of the wider charity community rather than a specific legacy one. But again, we do offer things like lab tours and events for those that, so they do have some sort of, we're so grateful for what you do, but they don't want to feel like part of a restricted society, was what we found specifically to Gifts and Wills. But there we go.
And it's interesting because we've got a mixture of people from different countries, but it's definitely more of a North American model, actually, the legacy society, although it does happen in the UK more in the sort of cultural university sector, really. So was that John I heard for a second?
Yeah, I can come back on the Save the Children question, Emily. Yes, so the research that you describe took place a couple of years ago, and I think is quite UK specific. Other Save the Children members, particularly in New Zealand and Australia, their Eglantine Jeb societies are thriving. But I think and America, I think as well. But that sense of it's more kind of pitched at a major donor kind of level. It's more like a bit of a not quite the same as a Tiffany circle, but that sense of a board or a group. Whereas I think in the UK, what came out of the research was the importance of feeling closer to the organisation, to feel informed, and to understand the impact of a particular gift, and to feel that kind of real sense of trust and personal connection to that organisation. And so what we developed instead was much more of an ongoing supporter journey, with opportunities such as going to events based regionally, and we were lucky enough to have regional legacy managers rather than wholly depend on the community side of things. But I think it's particular markets it suits and others that it doesn't. So I mean, I would recommend all charities to do their own research with their supporters, and I agree with Claire Routley that certainly in the arts and culture sector, and possibly even the university sector, this model fits better rather than like a mass organisation like ourselves.
Great. Well, that's a really interesting debate there. Shall we, I've just realised time is pressing on, so I will just leap forward from this, but thank you for all your thoughts. So we've talked about lead generation and cultivation, so on to conversion. And there is, again, some very interesting research in this space from the Behavioural Insights team. And in their most recent study, what they were looking at was, again, in the situation where someone is sitting sort of face to face with a solicitor, how do you frame the message about Leave It a Gift in the most effective manner? So they started off with some emotional messages, as you can see here, the one about family and highlighting causes that you and family are actually passionate about. Reciprocity, so again, the motivation we've already talked about, but really highlighting that at the point of making an ask. And this is an interesting one. So again, picking up on the reciprocity cue, but also adding in there that there's a benefit to the donor themselves. So these are the results, as you can see here. So it's these were all tested, I should say, actually against a standard ask, which is just, would you like to leave some money to charity in your will? And as you can see here, the family message actually bringing in the fact that the wider family are passionate as well as the donor particularly, pushed up 15% against that standard ask. Reciprocity 9%. And if I should ask you to vote on the next one, what you think it might be, because this might surprise you somewhat. It actually decreased interest, actually adding that additional benefit, which is pretty surprising actually, especially in the sense that other research tells us that there does seem to be an uplift in legacy giving at around the inheritance tax level. And so just sort of speculating really, but there is, again, some research from the wider donation world, actually around blood donation, which says that incentives seem to actually reduce interest in that particular case, and that perhaps it's by almost sort of signalling that giving where there's a benefit is actually for selfish people. So perhaps that's what's going on in that particular case. Actually reminding people of the personal benefit to them is not helpful there. Interesting stuff, really. So again, they also tested looking at social norms, which, as it says here, pushed up interest by 10% in the particular cases of where there was a free will offer as well. And then there is a posthumous reminder, so including those words after you're gone, which again, having said that symbolic immortality living on in some way is really important, again, you might be surprised to see that it consistently reduced giving. So perhaps what's going on here, though, is actually it's clashing with that mortality reminder piece, that it's reminding people that they are mortal, and potentially putting people off in that particular case. So these effects generally were more pronounced where people were actually receiving a free will writing service, which is another interesting finding there. And again, that people with children are less affected by these messages. And I suppose, again, in that particular case, they've got a sort of slightly different route to symbolic immortality through their children living on. So again, in a separate set of research that I was involved with Professor Russell James on, we also looked at stories of living legacy pledges. So we tested no stories, we tested having stories of people who had died and left a gift, and we tested stories of people who were still alive and planning to leave a gift. And again, we found that telling stories of people who were alive and planning to do this in the future was, a very effective way of spreading the legacy message. And one more point that I think is really important to mention, and perhaps even more for the people from the US than the UK here, really, but where there's lots of sort of formal terms because you've got a variety of planned giving vehicles that sadly we don't have access to in the UK. But generally what seems to happen is that where you're talking about gifts in wills or various sort of planning vehicles and you're using these formal terms, it actually seems to, and I'd say quite dramatically actually, lowers people's interest in charitable giving. So in the example on the slide, you can see, essentially it's exactly the same question, but where it's actually expressed in that more sort of legalistic way, it actually decreases people's interest in legacy giving. Okay, and just one more point on language. Again, this is a piece of research that is based around a theory called construal theory, which essentially says that we think differently when we're thinking about the long-term future as opposed to the here and now. And if you wanted to do, sort of long story short, really, when people are thinking about making a gift, today, tomorrow, then what seems to work more effectively is focusing in on detail, the nitty-gritty detail. Whereas actually, when they're thinking about legacy, about a gift essentially that they will be giving in the longer term, then actually they seem to tap more into sort of big picture, big vision for the organisation. So on the bottom of this slide, you can see we've taken, essentially, again, trying to say very similar things, but expressing them in a way that potentially would work more effectively for legacy, as opposed to how it would work for lifetime giving. Okay, and we also, just in this space, did a study relatively recently where we looked at, again, potentially putting people into tests with slightly different time periods. And what we found in this particular test, so we basically put people into groups depending on whether we were going to talk about the next 10 years or the next 50 years. And then also put them into groups around whether we were talking about gifts about the impact that gifts would have on the natural world as opposed to family and friends. And what we found, if if I can get the slide to, there we go, get the slide to click, is that people seemed more likely to consider in the 50 years condition where we're sort of linked back to their family and friends. So what we kind of think is going on there is essentially where people are thinking about a time period in the very long-term future and a time period for which most of them it'll be post-death. They actually want to affiliate with other people specifically, because again, that will help them to gain that sense of symbolic immortality living on in some way, shape or form. Okay. Oh, I think I need to leap over to Kiki now. So if you just give me a moment and I will swap. Here we go.
So Claire shared some key motives and language and that promotes legacy giving. However, there are some barriers that we need to overcome as well. And first of all, there is a barrier around the timing of the ask. Most wouldn't think of making a will just to leave a legacy, but because of certain life events, just because they got married or they have kids or they're just being diagnosed with a serious illness. Of course, it's impossible for you to know this in order to time your ask. However, if the ask is made when they are writing up their will, if the solicitor asks them during that time, that will significantly increase legacy pledges. And here you can see some results where just this happened. So solicitors have been asked to ask people, would you like to leave a gift to a charity that you care about? And just this question increased legacy pledges from 5% to 10%. So since different people have different identities and different connections to different causes, that means that if everyone was doing this, legacy pledges would increase across the board for all charities in general. Now, there are also some other barriers. We've talked about how people with kids and a family are less likely to leave a legacy gift. However, research shows that they are 88% more likely to leave a gift if first they perceive their family needs as taken care of. There are also barriers that the charity itself imposes. So, for example, compared to other fundraising asks, there are very few solicitations for legacy gifts, or the few solicitations that exist are usually restricted to a specific audience. Finally, some people might consider planning their estate or writing a will as a huge hassle, a lot of work, and that's why they might avoid doing it. Interestingly, people who have gone through that process, they don't find it as such a hassle, but just the perception is enough for people to just avoid it. So what can you do about these barriers? Here we're going to list a few ways that you can work around them. And one of them is you could collaborate with solicitors to showcase your legacy material. Or, of course, you should increase the number of asks, hopefully with the strategy that we've talked about, having a journey in mind. You should include more people in your legacy requests, as many wills are made early when there is a significant change in a person's life, and donors that include a charitable gift in their will are unlikely to remove it. If they make a change, usually it's to increase the amount rather than decrease or remove it completely. What is more, even though legacy gifts increase in line with socioeconomic status, which would suggest to only include these people at the higher end of scale, actually 58% of US bequests are left by donors with income less than 75K a year. So there is reason to include more people than we might include right now. If possible, you could also target people that have wills already. That's particularly helpful for supporters that have a family, because these are going to be the people who consider their family needs as taken care of, since they already have a will. Then, as we discussed, based on the messages that tap into the different motives for people with family and people with no family, you should tailor your offers to them accordingly. you should definitely prove that this isn't a huge task. It's something that they can do easily by using supported quotes to prove that, to provide the authenticity of that claim. But also you could provide a free will service to remove the hassle completely. The benefit from that is that more people will leave a legacy gift when you offer a free will writing service, but also, as we've seen, most of the messages that Claire shared with us previously were influencing people who accepted the use of a free will service. So that's an added bonus to that. Finally, this table here summarizes the overall strategy around legacy giving. About the timing of requests, there's not much that you can do, but maybe if you collaborate with solicitors, but you can definitely offer a free will writing service. You should always keep it simple, informal language. Definitely play back their connection to the cause and who they are. Use messages that focus on the abstract long-term benefits. Use social norms and talk about other living donors that have left a pledge. And of course, tailor the message based on whether they have kids or not. So this is an example of a communication that could be sent to someone that has a family. As you can see, the first we do is we ask them to provide for your family, but then also we continue with this need to live on, make sure your values live on with our free will writing service. We all want to leave something behind, our posterity desire. Family and friends, of course, will be the first people to consider. We emphasize that need for them. Then we add some social proof. Many of our clients include a charity. After you've covered your family needs, again, we emphasize that need. You could also leave money to a charity that you're passionate about and ensure your vision lives on. You can even leave a gift in honor of a loved one, because we've seen that that increases interest. And then we end by showing that it's not a hassle, and with a quote from a supporter that emphasizes all these points. So how does this communication differ to one that is sent to people without kids? We just remove any reference to family and we play up this need for posterity and need to live on. We all want to leave something behind to be remembered by, that will reflect who we are and what we stand for. And again, the rest of the messages mirror the other communication. So the differences aren't massive, it's just knowing which messages to emphasize more for which audience. Are there any questions about this strategy so far and the messages we use? Okay. Everything seems reasonable, nothing stands out. Any objections to things that we shouldn't be doing it this way?
We're actually going to start free will, using free will, that service. I think in the next month, and this just statistic you have here is pretty impressive. So I'll be passing that along.
Yeah, please make sure to let us know. And if you test some of these messages, we'd also love to know this. Maybe we can have a webinar in a few months showing your results. Right, I'm also conscious of time, so I'll press on again and I'll hand over to Claire to finish off.
Great. All right. Make sure I press all the right buttons here. Sorry, I have to just switch things along slightly. Here we go. Oop, and I realised I was so fascinated by what Kiki was saying, I wasn't moving my slides on. There we go. So the final point really we wanted to make is securing a pledge is not the end of the road. So as Kiki says, most research with living people says that, you know, once they put a charity in, it'll stay in, and they'll only change their mind when circumstances is changed for them. But again, there is another piece of fascinating research which says something slightly different and focuses on later life changes, again from the wonderful Russell James, and he does find that especially towards the end of their lives, plans do become more and more unstable. So it is really important that we embrace this idea of stewardship and look after people as effectively as we can. So there's some key things to remember here. Overall, again, research from Professor Adrian Sargent and Chasey Hilton says that overall, legacy donors are actually more demanding than other donors generally. And as I've been saying earlier, really, I think that links back to that need to live on in some way and to know that their gifts are going to be impactful. So quality of communications is really important for legacy donors. They want to know that you communicate with them effectively and that you're responsive to what they say. And I think this quote on the slide is really insightful in the sense of a legacy pledger saying, well, actually, I didn't really used to look at what they sent me until I put them in their will. And now actually I read everything that comes through the door. So you have to be very aware that your legacy supporters are watching you very carefully to make sure that you are an efficient, effective organisation, and they're judging that really through the quality of communications. As we said, donors, they're more demanding. They want you to be responsive to them generally, and they want you to sustain high quality communications and service. That's crucial. So things you can do, we'll keep them up to date about successes, respond to queries or needs promptly, make sure that the pledge isn't lost when they update or rewrite their will. That's really, really important, and I think is a function of all these good things that we're talking about here. And reflecting connections to the cause is not just about that point at which you're trying to recruit the donor in. It's actually a good way of sustaining that connection with somebody over time. And as always, giving people choice in what they receive, and understanding what their needs are and what they want to actually hear from you about. And just to add in another thought, really, I would also say, memorability in communications. That actually, one of the reasons we think perhaps that people take charities out is it's not always a proactive thing. It's actually sometimes just that they've forgotten that you were in there in the first place. And so actually, making sure that your communications with them are memorable. And I think that example of going to, feed the puppies and the kittens is just a really lovely one, because, who's going to forget that wonderful experience interacting with the animals if you are someone who's got that connection to a cause like that. Okay, so over to Kiki.
Right, this brings us to the end of this webinar. If you take one thing away today, is that you need to create a legacy journey that starts with lead generation all the way to stewardship after you've secured the pledge. And the journey should use behavioral insights in order to improve all the metrics that we're interested in. So if you are interested in building such a science-based legacy journey, we'd be more than happy to help, and you can contact either myself or Claire, and if you have more questions about it or you want to start working on it. Thank you all for your attention and for your comments and questions. You should receive an email in the next few days with a link to the webinar, and in the meantime, enjoy your weekend.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.